Well, I have to confess, I briefly considered a clickbait title for this. Couldn't bring myself to do it. Anyway, here's a scenario. Let's say you're given a ticket or a request or whatever it is that you do, and the ticket is basically on publish. I want to take whatever's in the body property of the homepage, for example, and I want to chuck it into a database. And the body property is just an XhtmL string, and you think, easy. I'll just do a publish event. I know how publish events work. They're super simple, on published. I'll just grab the contents of that property and I'll chuck it into a database. And so you lowball the estimate, you do the work, deliver it, and everything seems great. And then the client comes back and says, the links are weird. And you're like, the links are weird? And you look in the database and, yeah, the links are weird. What's going on? Well, let's dive into it. All right, so let's take a look at debugging this. What I've got before me is basically a stock standard CMS 12 website install with very little content, very few models. I've got my homepage model, I've got my homepage controller. I'm using features layout because I like pain, and I've got the CMS running in the background here in edit mode, and there's my XhtmlString body, which is what we're going to be using for testing. So let's throw a few links in there and see what we get out of it. I think we can do an internal link, and let's do an external link, and we'll see how both of these respond. Internal link, we can link to a page. How about us? A site just isn't a site without an About Us page. And the external link, we'll just go to Google. Save that, and publish. So now what I want to do is just from my controller, just to make this quick and simple, I want to pull out that content and see what the links look like and just see if it's something with the links, which it is. Spoiler alert. We'll create a new string builder to do this because we have a lot of ways to pull content out of an HTML string property. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to append those so I don't recall exactly all the options, but we'll do current content dot body dot. Let's see what we have for our options. There's obviously ToString, so we'll say ToString is that, and just to make things easier, let's append a new line. Nope. What else do we have? There's also, you've probably noticed, ToHtmlString. Let's take a look at what that produces. I saw another one. Let's do .toInternalString. And I saw one more, edit string. Let's see. Then to make this easier to inspect, we'll just say output equals sb.toString. Let's run this. All right, we've hit our breakpoint. Let's view the results. So ToString, that produces that weird link we're expecting. External link works just great. So it's an internal link issue. ToHtmlString looks pretty much the same. ToInternalString looks pretty much the same. And ToEditString, well, that's the edit mode URL. So that makes sense. You would never use ToEditString unless you're specifically in edit mode. So we can just ignore that. So what is this weird link? Chances are, if you've been working with an Optimizely CMS for any amount of time, you've seen these crop up on sites from time to time. These are permanent URLs or permanent links. Basically, internally, the CMS tracks all links between contents using the content GUID. That's actually what this piece of the link is right here. This is the content GUID of the piece of content you've linked to. The format is always /link, /content GUID, and then the extension. The reason Episerver Optimizely, it's not it's Optimizely. The reason Optimizely CMS does this is so that at render time, it can get the correct URL for that piece of content. If it saved whatever the URL happened to be at publish time, well, that link would go stale. So this is a way of keeping links fresh, at least internal links. A common thing I see people do at this point is they look at this and they say, okay, I've got HTML. I've got links that need to be corrected. I think I kind of have an idea of how to correct them, but I need to extract them and update them. So I'll bring in Angle Sharp and throw it through an HTML parser and find all the hrefs. And no, don't do that. You should not do that. That's not, I mean, you can do that. And there are sometimes valid reasons to do that. But if the only thing you're doing is correcting these links, then that's overkill because the links are already parsed out for you. They're fragments. And we'll show you that in 1 second. And it's been 1 second. And for the record, that awkward transition was not because I had to pause the video to go to use the bathroom. It's because it was a good idea. And it was cool that I did it. So back to the screen, as mentioned, I'm going to take all of this stuff out because I don't really care about the string representation of my HTML. What I really care about is the internal fragment representation of this property. I'm going to leave my string builder, though, because I still want to build up a version of this. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through all of the fragments of my body content property. So as we can see, there is a string fragment collection, and if I iterate through that, I get a list of string fragments. So let's just do the super naive thing here and just append the fragments to a string, and then just because I want to, I'm going to add some new lines after each one just to help separate that. So let's run this. And after it's run, it's built up that string. Let's take a look at what we get. We've got a bunch of types because apparently calling ToString isn't the right thing to do. It's just using like the default object ToString where it returns the type name. But this does give me some important information, which is what types of fragments do I have to deal with? So let's pop this in here. Very helpful, thanks. Auto formatting, cool, doesn't matter. So as mentioned before, it returns a list of, an enumerable of string fragment. Well, that's an interface, and any number of types might implement string fragment. Unfortunately, there's no way to know all of the types that might do that, but I do know some of them because I see them here now. So what I'm going to do is take advantage of some of the new C# syntax, and this should not be fragments, this should be fragment. And I'm going to switch on the type of fragment. So let's say static fragment. And then there is also URL fragment. Nope. And then in cases where it's a different type that I don't know about yet, I'm just going to punt and drop that in as just a regular, just call ToString. So at the very least, I'll see the type and know about it. Probably the better thing to do would be to throw a new not implemented exception. But for debugging right now, I'm not going to do that. So I still don't know for sure what's in these. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do StaticFragment dot. Let's take a look. So there's get edit format. I'm guessing that will get the string that shows for edit mode. What else do we have? There's get view format. That will probably be maybe what's shown on the front end, but not exactly. Let's use get view format for now. And I'm going to do the same thing here for URL fragment. And I'm going to set a breakpoint here, and we're going to step through these and just see what is in each of them. And reload. So we've got our fragment. It is a static fragment, and the internal format is right up to the link. So Static fragments are just basically anything that is not special for some other reason. All of the HTML. Notice it's not like valid HTML, it's just a chunk of text that happens to be part of an HTML string. So let's dump that into our buffer. Take a look. Buffer's looking good. Let's check the next fragment. This one is a URL fragment. Let's take a look at what we have on this. So the internal format, there's our permanent link. Remember the link /GUID.extension. There's reference permanent URLs. These are basically a list of things that this piece of content links to, so that I can go into that the lookup. So if I link to a JPEG and then I go to delete the JPEG, it'll yell at me and say, "No, the homepage is still using that JPEG." So that's what that's about. But what I don't see here is like the final, resolved link. So I'm probably gonna have to do something there myself. But let's append that anyways. And it appended the the permanent link. Keep going. The last fragment is another static fragment. That's the rest of the string. So it's interesting that the external link doesn't get treated as a URL fragment because the external link doesn't need any more resolution. It's already resolved. So it just goes in as part of the text. So after doing all of that, we're right back where we started, but we know we've got a fragment that represents just this piece of the string, so we can work with that. We've got the URL fragment separated. We know just from looking at it that's a permanent link, but we need to convert the permanent link into sort of the resolved content link. So how do we do that? So we know we've got this URL. Let's take a look at it again. Reload. Let's drop that there. So our URL looks like this. Now, we've got a problem in that we need to get this GUID out, and we need to get the content based on the GUID. Some people look at this and be like, oh, regex, and now you've got two problems. Other people might think, do a substring, index of or whatever. But the best way to do it is with the permanent link utility. Did I spell that right? There we go. And you need to get the GUID. So what you can do is pass in a URL to this utility. And it's going to return to you a GUID. And the GUID is either going to have some value or it's going to be empty. So it's a little awkward to work with, but basically if content GUID is not equal to GUID.empty, well, we know this is a piece of content. Otherwise, this shouldn't not be content, but in those cases, I'm just going to drop whatever's in there into the stream and hope for the best. So we have a content GUID. It's just a matter of grabbing the content out of the CMS and getting the URL, which, we should all basically know how to do. I'm going to do this super lazy. I'm going to bring in service locator, current get instance of iContentLoader, not area, loader, iContentLoader, dot get as iContent. And we're going to pass that content GUID in. Thank you for that. There we go. And then we just need to append the resolved URL. So many namespaces. Let's just do that. Current, again, being very lazy here, but let's get URL of the content. There we go. Let's run this again and see where we're at. So this time our output is correct. It links. We got it. We figured it out. Once again, the triumphant hero. You ship your fix, send it off to the client. Everyone's thumbs up, cheering you. And then the client says, our blocks don't work. And you say, your blocks don't work? And they say, yeah, we put some blocks in the body content Xhtml property, and they're not showing up. And you say, I told you not to do that. But they did. So apparently there's more we got to figure out. Okay, so Now we know we've got blocks in the content, so let's set this scenario up and see what we're working with. So I'm just going to open this up. Let's just drop an example block in here, publish our changes, and let's go ahead and use the debugger and see what case did we not catch. So here we are. We're at the case. The fragment is a content fragment. If we take a look at what's available, we've got the content GUID. We've got the content link. That's handy. Display options. Quite a bit going on here. I think the big thing, though, is we have the content link. So here's where things get a little dicey. We can detect when someone's embedded a block into the Xhtml area. We can get the content ID. The next step is to render that content to a string and include it in our buffer, but rendering a block to a string is actually a pretty dicey affair. At this point, I would probably, if this was a real ticket, I would say, let's look at some other options. Maybe send this through the normal Episerver rendering pipeline and just extract the stuff that we need, or however you want to do it. But for the purposes of this deep dive, I'm just going to go ahead and grab that piece of content and render it my own way, which is I would not recommend. But again, just for the purposes of an example, that's what we're going to do. So what did we say that was? It was a content, not content reference, content fragment. I'm just going to do this again. And I technically can't call it content. Content fragment dot. You can do content link or GUID, and we'll do content link since we've got it. Problem is we need to be able to render this somehow. So I think what I'm going to do is I have an interface here called self-render, or iSelfRender. Rendering. And let's just say that on this interface we have render to string builder buffer. So anything that is self-rendering knows how to render itself to a string builder. So what we can do here is we'll go that self-rendering, and then self-rendering dot render to there. So I have a block. I called it code block. It's not really a code block, but that's what I called it. And we're going to make this code block extend iSelfRendering. So that means it needs to be able to render itself. And all we have is an XhtmlString. And so we need to be able to render an XhtmlString, which we're doing in the homepage controller. So maybe it makes sense to pull this out. Let's get rid of these excess comments and make this its own thing. So I'm going to do that. Next, I'm going to leave the string builder here for now. I'm going to pull all of this out. And just in the interest of time, I'm going to tack it on here. Oh, very smart, Visual Studio. And it needs to go to a string builder buffer. Actually, I'm going to call it SB so it matches. Paste all this in there. Everything should be pretty close to working. We'll just say HTML here. And we've got 1,000 namespaces to import. Hopefully I got them all right. So now in the homepage controller, I can say current content.body.render to SB. On my code block, I can do this.body.render to buffer. Here we go. So now the code block should render itself. I will set a breakpoint here and we'll just test it. So we get the content. The content is self-rendering. We drop in here, and it recursively renders itself. And there it is. This is an embedded block. Let's drop out of this. Take a look at the output. There we go. In this very extremely simplified scenario, we got a block to render from the content fragment. So you pack up your code, you ship it, everything looks good, you're the hero, and then the client comes back and says, great job, blocks are rendering, except the personalized blocks. And you go, no, why are you doing personalization in an Xhtml string? But actually it's kind of cool that you can do that. I'm good on you for using the tools, because a lot of people don't. But it is a slight monkey wrench in what we're doing. So clearly there's another fragment type that we have to handle. So let's hop in here and figure out what it is that we need to handle. So, we'll just do the same thing that we've been doing, which is adding more things to our property here. So let's grab a personalized block. And then let's actually personalize it. So let's say this is, let's see, I think I have a test group. Maybe I have an example group. There it is. So people who are in the example group will see this. And let's say I'm going to include in a group, we'll call this the fallback group. And save that. So now we've got personalized content that is not in any group, and we have personalized content that is for a specific group. Boy, that's hard to say in a way that's not confusing. So we have fallback content, which is personalized for fallback, and then we have personalized content that is for a specific group. Let's publish that change, and let's drop back in here to our rendering and set a breakpoint here at the default for when we don't know what the block is, and see what we're doing. So we've got a fragment. It is a personalized content fragment, and within that we've got internal format. That looks useless, but we have more fragments. Okay, so the recursion just keeps going. We've got a bunch of fragments. There's a content group. Okay, interesting. Yeah, so what else do we have? I don't know. I don't see anything else. Let's not sneak a peek at the private stuff. Let's keep going. We got another one, also a personalized content fragment, which looks pretty similar. It's got a list of fragments. There's that internal format, etc. So let's dive into that. Let's set a case for it. Case personalized content fragment. And what methods do we have? So we know we've got fragments. I feel like we'll have to change something there. We have content group, which is basically the name of the group that the person is associated with. Get roles. So I'll spoil this one. Get roles is actually returning a list of GUIDs of, well, I think they're GUIDs, but basically IDs of who should see this content, usually visitor groups. And so in this example, we're going to just push back and say, okay, we'll handle personalized content, but only fallback content, because how am I supposed to know which personalization group someone falls into when I'm during publish? There's no one to personalize. So what we can do is we can get roles here. And then if roles is not equal to null, and roles dot any. So basically, if they have assigned any roles to this, nope, not going to do it. Does that not work? What's going on here? Oh, there it is. There it goes. Otherwise, this is like a fallback group, because if there are no roles assigned to this, then it must be a fallback. So what we need to do is recurse. The issue is that this is expecting an Xhtml string. So I'm going to adjust that. I'm going to make a copy of this. And instead of an Xhtml string, I am going to take just an IEnumerable of iString fragment. Then I can take basically all of this. I should have just changed this one's signature instead of moving all this code, but you get the idea. And then instead of HTMLString.fragments, I can just go straight to the fragments. And then I can leave this and just say, oops, I don't need return, but I can say render to HTMLString.fragments string builder. I can take the same thing. Instead of going to the HTML string, I know I've got my personalized content here. Personalized content fragment has a list of fragments. Now I'm recursing through those. So let's take a look if what we just did works. In fact, maybe we'll step through it just to do that. There we go. So we get a list of roles. Now trying to remember, the first one is fallback content. So we've got no roles. It's not null, but there are none. So we can render the child fragments, I guess we'll call it. And it's the same thing. We've got a new line. What else do we have in here? It's a content fragment. So that makes sense. It's a block. So it gets that content. It renders it. All is good. Then there's apparently another new line. And then we're done. Come back to where we started. Finish up. I'm going to keep going. So here's our next fragment, personalized content. This one has one role, which is this GUID, which you'll just have to take my word for is the ID of a visitors group that I assigned to this. And because it has a role, we're just going to skip it. So let's take that breakpoint off, jump out here, set this breakpoint, do it again. Oops. Keep going. Let's see what our output looks like. Great. We've got the fallback content. This is an embedded block. And then we don't have the personalized content, which is what we wanted. So we're really kind of just scratching the surface of, the internal complexities of the Xhtml string. The key thing I wanted to get across is that if you need to get an Xhtml string as a string, .ToHtmlString probably isn't going to cut it. And it turns out there's actually a pretty complicated rendering pipeline underneath the hood, especially when you get into rendering blocks, you get into personalization. If you're doing this from a view, you pretty much always want to do property for or dot, what is it? render XhtmlString, I think, on the HTML helper. The point is you don't want to call ToString. And in those cases when you have to, like if you're indexing your content to some third-party thing that doesn't understand content references, or whatever the case may be, you will have to delve down into the fragments to really get an understanding of what is in the Xhtml string. But before I finish up, I want to show one last thing. So on my homepage, I have a property called content, which is a content area. The cool thing about what we've built is that I can call render2 on that content area, even though I didn't build a function specifically for content areas. And the reason for that, if you didn't already know or haven't already guessed, is that content areas are actually just a specialized Xhtml string. And so the things you can do with a Xhtml string, you can kind of sort of do with a content area. And if I were to get into the CMS, throw some stuff into that content area and call this render thing, it would work pretty much the same way as the Xhtml string. So I think that's kind of interesting. It's really very elegant when you think about it, and just a thing to know. So anyway, thanks for watching. I hope this was helpful, and watch out for those fragments.